New business models. The field of new business models research is very interested in how new business models can contribute to sustainability. And indeed, we can see this in the wealth of conceptual approaches to new business models that have been contributed recently. However, this also gives rise to a new set of research questions. How do you really know that the new business model is more sustainable? Does it need to be radically innovative? Can incrementally new business models also be contributing to sustainability? If any field has been dealing with questions about sustainability, it has been the field of sustainability transitions. However, our two fields, the field of new business models and the field of sustainability transitions, have scarcely been linked up till now. My name is PJ Beers. I'm a professor of new business models at Haas University of Applied Sciences and a senior researcher at DRIFT, the Dutch Research Institute for Transitions. In this presentation, I introduce a transformative business model concept to draw an explicit connection between the fields of sustainability transitions and new business models. I apply this concept to a transition challenge in the Dutch region of the Green Heart. Probably the most well-known conceptualization of a business model is Osterwalder's business model canvas, which you see here. This model has been very popular both in the literature and in practice. However, it's also been criticized a lot from the field of new business models. And although there's various different criticisms that have been voiced, I think the main criticisms all deal with how Osterwalder's canvas deals with value. In terms of value, if you look at the value proposition in Osterwalder's model, then what you see is that Osterwalder sees value as positive and financial. But if you look at reality, then many business models, many businesses, many industrial practices also have many externalities. These mostly constitute negative values, for instance, to society, social values, planetary values. Think of environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, climate change, which are not factored into the business model of Osterwalder. So the main criticisms are, first of all, it only deals with value in financial terms, and second, it does not include externalities and negative values that are also produced with business models. And these criticisms have given rise to a wealth of new approaches to new business models. Let's have a look at some advances in the field. Take, for example, this new business model concept made by Nancy Bokken. You clearly see here that the value proposition has triple P value. Society, environment, and economics are all included in the value proposition in this sufficiency-driven business model approach. Another example, the Flourishing business canvas designed by Anthony Upwood and Peter Jones. Here again you recognize different types of value. Economy, society, and environment are the large squares depicted in the back of the business model canvas drawn here. Also, you see the inclusion of many ecosystem actors and larger systemic needs. Third example, the cloverleaf model by Jan Jonker. And here you see the inclusion of community structure, different types of actors included, and again different types of value included. So, what do these different approaches have in common? They have an inclusive way of dealing with normative issues. Normative requirements are included. What we see is a value proposition that includes people, planet, and prosperity, and you see an inclusion of wider stakeholder networks. And this has clear advantages. First of all, there's a clear difference between business models that are sustainable and conventional business models. It is clear what the sustainability advantages are in terms of people, planet, value, and of course prosperity. However, it also is clear from these approaches that the systemic environment around the business model remains largely implicit. And that does mean that it is very hard with these approaches to account for systemic or even transformative change. And this again leaves the question, how can we distinguish a new business as usual model from a truly transformative business model? How can we connect wider systemic transformative change to business model innovation? So, what is the sustainability transitions field about? Think of the energy transition. What you see depicted here is a shift in the energy system from one stable state of dynamic equilibrium to another, from a state where we produce energy based on the consumption of fossil fuels to a state where we produce energy based on renewable sources of energy. The transitions perspective is a systems perspective. We conceive of a societal system as consisting of both material and non-material elements, such as infrastructures, markets, discourses, politics, science, actors, practices. And this combination of elements also makes that a societal system can be seen as both complex and adaptive. And this nature, being complex and adaptive, gives it an evolutionary nature. This means two things. First of all, the system will co-evolve with changes in its external environment. Think of climate change, global population growth, and it also consists of an internal evolutionary process where the different elements evolve along each other. What does this mean for the whole system behavior? A societal system has a tendency to optimization. Its incumbent structure will favor incumbent practices, which then tend to optimize themselves, and also will provide barriers to alternative or new practices. Usually, when we think of system stability, we think that it is a good thing. However, from a transitions perspective, stability actually is problematic. And this idea is conceptualized in one of the most influential transition studies frameworks, the multi-level perspective by Frank Geels. You see it depicted here. The multi-level perspective conceives of a societal system in three layers. In the middle, you see what is dominant right now, the social-technical regime. This regime, however, can become under pressure when there are certain landscape developments from a socio-technical landscape that cannot be dealt with by optimizing the current regime. In that case, what you need is radical change from niche innovations. The chances of a transition happening would be largest if there are, on the one hand, strong landscape pressures, and on the other hand, there are multiple niche innovations which have the potential to result in structural system change. It is important to note that a transition perspective and a new business model perspective are two very distinct approaches. It might be very well possible to have a sustainability transition without sustainable business model development, and conversely, it might very well be possible to have new, radically more sustainable business models without them ever resulting in system change. I've depicted that here in this schematic. What you see on the left-hand corner side is business as usual, that is, conventional business models and system optimization. On the right-hand bottom side, we see sustainable business models for niche markets, that is, new business models that are radically more sustainable but do not affect larger system-wide change. Conversely, on the left-hand top side, market transformation but business model optimization, i.e. we have business models that are largely the same but institutional changes that result in radically different systems. Only on the top right side we see a role for transformative business models, that is, radically more sustainable business models that actively contribute to wider transformative system change. To further illustrate this, let's think of a couple of examples. For instance, if we have a sustainable business model for niche markets, we might think of permaculture business models, which are currently very small scale, which are radically innovative in terms of their environmental impacts and also in terms of their farming practices, but currently they do not have any potential to radically change incumbent markets, so no real transition effect right now. Also, for the top left side of the diagram, we might think of climate neutral greenhouse production. This would mean that current greenhouses in the Netherlands who are using loads of natural gas are moving towards renewable sources of energy, but if you look at what they produce, how they produce, what they sell, what they offer, i.e. large-scale production for international markets with long food chains, we do not see any radical change in terms of business model. But for the wider system, it is very relevant and transition if a system shifts from fossil fuels to fully renewable sources. we propose a transformative business model concept to bridge the fields of sustainability transition studies and new business models. What you see here is a depiction of our approach. In the middle, the green circle, we see a sustainability business model with a triple value orientation: products and services delivered by the business, the production and chain that are necessary to produce the products and services, and of course the valuation, what the business gets in return. This basically is inspired on all these authors before us in the field of new business models who have developed sustainability business model concepts. The red outer circle is what might be beyond the business's direct control, but what is within the system's direct environment of the business model. Those changing discourses in the field, those changing relational networks, institutional changes in practices all around the business model that, however, may come to affect the business model, and conversely, it might be possible for the business to influence their wider systemic concept through these discourses, relations, institutions, and practices. Through adding this reflexive orientation, these discourses, relations, institutions, and practices, we draw an explicit conceptual connection between the sustainability business model and the wider systemic context. The Green Heart is a rural region in the west of the Netherlands. Depicted here, you see its typical peat meadow landscape and its dominant practice of dairy farming, but this practice is under pressure. The most urgent concern for dairy farmers seems to be economic pressure. Dutch dairy farmers have a conventional business model based on cost-price leadership for international markets, but with international competition on the rise, the business model of the Dutch dairy farmer seems to be more and more economically unsustainable. Less urgent, but no less pressing on the long term, is the combined influence of climate change, soil subsidence, and salination. Dairy farming on peat meadows is only possible with a relatively low groundwater table, but this causes the top layer of the peat meadow to oxidize, causing considerable greenhouse gas emissions and soil subsidence. And on the long run, soil subsidence may also result in salination through the surfacing of saline groundwater sources. We have identified two distinct types of business model innovation that respond to these challenges. First, we see various entrepreneurs that switch to a margin-oriented business model. In their products, they emphasize the local story behind it, they sell in local food chains to critical consumers, and they practice nature-inclusive farming. We can clearly recognize a people, planet, profit, value proposition in this sustainable business model, and it already has some success on the market. The question is, are these business models also transformative? Unfortunately, they still contribute to peat oxidation, and with increasingly strict climate policy on the horizon, we wonder whether they will be able to deal with future institutional developments. A different type of business model innovation leaves dairy farming behind completely and tries to combine making money with rising groundwater tables and ultimately rising soils. Examples include polluter-culture, which can offer, for instance, insulation products for the construction industry, or cranberry farming. Such business models might also make money through carbon sequestration. However, markets for business models like these are still small, and for them to be truly transformative would also require further institutional change, for instance, true pricing of CO2 emissions and value for carbon sequestration. What have you learned about new business models and sustainability transitions? First of all, new business models may well offer sustainability advantages, but fail to foster sustainability transition. Second of all, some sustainable business models may have a transformative potential, but for them to really become a carrier of sustainability transition would be contingent on social and institutional developments within the wider system. My personal takeaway: I think that our results show that we need to take into account external systemic developments to strengthen the transformative potential of new business models. I hope that the transformative business model concept that we contributed here will help researchers and businesses alike to strengthen and foster sustainability transitions in many different fields.